The Battle of Kasserine Pass was one of the major engagements of the North Africa Campaign during World War II. It took place in February 1943 and was fought between the German Afrika Korps, led by General Erwin Rommel, and the Allied forces, primarily consisting of American troops. The battle was the first large-scale engagement the Americans faced and marked a significant turning point in the war. The Allies suffered a crushing defeat, with over 10,000 American troops killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. The defeat at Kasserine Pass was a shock to the American military. It led to a complete reassessment of strategy and tactics. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was in command of all Allied forces in North Africa, quickly realized that major changes were needed in the way the Americans fought. He replaced the commanding officers responsible for the defeat and initiated a major overhaul of the training and organization of American troops. The battle also had a profound impact on the German military. Although they emerged victorious, they suffered significant losses, and Rommel was forced to reassess his own strategy in Africa. He realized that the Americans were not the pushovers which he had assumed that they would be, and was shocked that they were adapting quickly to the realities of modern warfare. Overall, the Battle of Kasserine Pass was a pivotal moment in the North African campaign and a turning point in the war. It taught both sides the valuable lesson about the strengths and weaknesses of the respective militaries and set a stage for the long and bloody campaigns that were to come. In November 1942, the US and British forces carried out Operation Torch, which involved a landing in French Morocco and Algeria. This operation was launched shortly after the British 8th Army, led by Bernard Montgomery, achieved a victory in the Second Battle of El Alamein, which broke through the German lines. With the Allies closing in from both sides, Rommel's army was surrounded and had to retreat to Tunisia, the last remaining defensive position for the Axis powers. To hold Tunisia, the Axis forces brought in German and Italian reinforcements from Sicily, as Tunis was only a few hours away by boat and was one of the last waterways under Axis control. Albert Kesselring was given the task of setting up defenses, and troops were quickly transferred by air to Tunis. In late November and early December of 1942, the Allies attempted to take Tunis before Axis reinforcements arrived. Despite the belief that tank warfare in the desert would be like battleships fighting in the ocean, tank warfare in North Africa was tied to extended supply lines. Due to supply shortages, only one Allied division was ordered to try to take Tunis before German reinforcements arrived. The attempt to capture Tunis failed just short of their objective, with the Allies only 20 miles from the city before they were stopped. The African theater was the last thing on Hitler and the German General Staff's mind. Their attention was glued upon the Eastern Front, particularly the Caucasus and Stalingrad. The Wehrmacht was overstretched and outnumbered and desperate for oil. The Sixth Army was surrounded at Stalingrad, and the offensive to take the German oil fields had all but stalled. The only person that was concerned about Allied landings was Mussolini, who, despite all his flaws, accurately predicted the Torch landings and told anyone who would listen about the immediate threat to the African theater. With the Allies now encroaching on two sides, Italy would now be directly threatened. Almost as an afterthought, Hitler gave Kesselring free hand in Africa. Kesselring then immediately stole a portion of the supplies dedicated to relieving Pallas at Stalingrad to airlift his troops to Africa. The Germans launched a counterattack and pushed back the Allied divisions more than 20 miles. In January 1943, the Allied 8th Army took Tripoli, which was Rommel's main supply base. The Desert Fox had anticipated the fall of Tripoli and pulled his troops back to the Meurthe Line, which was a former French defensive line built to contain the Italians. At this point, Allied troops had crossed the Atlas Mountains to the west and established defensive positions at Fade. From Fade, the Allies could move east and cut Rommel's retreat. To counter this, the German 5th Panzer Army under General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim moved to stop the Allied advance and attack the Allied troops at Fade. The French defenders managed to inflict heavy casualties on the German attackers with the help of their 75mm guns. The US 1st Armored Division entered the battle and managed to push back the 5th Panzer. However, the Germans then launched a surprise attack on the Allies, and the 1st Armored Division was caught in an ambush once they tried to pursue the retreating 5th Panzer. Anti-tank guns decimated the division and forced them to retreat. The 21st Panzer Division launched a counterattack that successfully pushed back the Americans, forcing the Allies to retreat deeper into the Atlas Mountains. For the moment, the Axis forces were able to hold Tunisia proper. This gave Rommel some time to plan his next move. He concluded that the British 8th Army was not a threat at the moment, since it would take a month for their port to become operational in Tripoli. Taking advantage of this reprieve, Rommel decided to attack the Americans in the west. He wanted his troops to take the supply base in the region to disrupt the Allied buildup. Rommel centered his attack on the supply center at Sidi Bouzid, and on Valentine's Day, the 10th and 21st Panzer Division attacked the supply hub. The American defenders were spread thin and were defeated in detail. After their success at Sidi Bouzid, Rommel ordered the Afrika Korps assault group to attack Gafsa on the 15th. However, U.S. forces withdrew and took up defensive positions at Kasserine and Ziba Pass. U.S. forces suffered heavy losses with over 2,500 men, 100 tanks and vehicles lost in the ensuing battles. Rommel and Kasserine devised a plan to capitalize on the previous successes and strike at Kasserine in hopes of destroying more supply bases in the west. The Italian commander Supremo revised the plan and ordered the Germans to capture Uxles-Bains airfield west of Tebessa to further delay the Allies' ability to launch offensives in central Tunisia. Although Rommel believed the revised plan was too risky, he was forced to carry it out. In the early morning of February 19th, the Afrika Korps Assault Group and the 21st Panzer Division moved towards Kasserine Pass from two different directions. The 21st Panzer was tasked with attacking the Allies at Sibiba, while the Afrika Korps Assault Group moved to engage at Kasserine Pass proper. The 10th Panzer Division was kept in reserve and was poised to support either pass. 21st Panzer Division engaged a combined force of British, American, and French troops at Sibiba and met heavy resistance. The Allies had superiority in anti-tank guns and armor, forcing the 21st Panzer Division to retreat on the morning of the 20th. The defense of Kasserine Pass was primarily carried out by American infantry, artillery, and joint U.S.-French anti-tank units. The Afrika Korps Assault Group failed to catch the U.S. forces by surprise and was met with heavy artillery fire. Rommel ordered his troops to attack the high ground above the pass and also sent infantry below. At around noon, Rommel committed his Panzer Division, but they all failed to make significant progress. By nightfall, the Germans had made little advancement against the Americans. That evening, Rommel decided to deploy his reserves, including the 10th Panzer Division and the Italian 131st Motorized Division. The Afrika Korps resumed their offensive on the morning of the 20th. With the support of their committed reserves and total air superiority, they quickly overwhelmed the U.S. Outnumbered and outgunned, the Allied troops were forced to retreat as the Germans poured through the pass, and by mid-afternoon, the battle was over. The surviving Allied soldiers withdrew about 10 miles back to their lines, abandoning their tanks and anti-tank guns to avoid being captured. Rommel continued his offensive, leading his troops along the Hatab River towards Hadra and Tebessa. However, the Germans encountered heavy resistance from U.S. and armored infantry divisions at Jebel el Hamra the following day. Despite their tactical superiority in air and ground, Rommel failed to dislodge the American defenders. By the end of the day, both sides were at a standstill and planned to resume their offensive the next day. On February 23rd, the Afrika Korps launched another attack in an attempt to break the American line. However, once again, the U.S. troops held their ground. General Paul Robinette and Terry Allen then led a counterattack, forcing Rommel to retreat. Following this, Rommel followed the 10th Panzer Division towards the town of Tala, where the survivors of Kasserine Pass were fighting a delaying action to avoid being encircled. The Americans eventually linked up with the British forces, and on the following day, they stopped the 10th Panzer using their superior heavy artillery. With Rommel's troops overextended, he realized that it was time to pull back. The Allies had suffered around 10,000 casualties after the defeat of Kasserine Pass. Rommel had planned on using the limited reprieve from the advance of the British 8th Army to attack the inexperienced Americans. Rommel defied orders from Kesselring to preserve his tanks and went on the offensive, and was surprised to find how quickly the Americans had adapted to mobile warfare. Rommel was particularly impressed with U.S. half-tracks and incorporated captured half-tracks into his own units. What Eisenhower learned from the battle was that his senior army commanders were far from their units on the ground, and as a result, their troops lacked discipline. The GIs did not dig trenches as ordered, and instead dug foxholes, which exposed them to enemy artillery fire. The soldiers did this out of convenience due to the fact that the ground in North Africa was hard to dig through. Eisenhower also learned the importance of air superiority and saw how difficult it was to deploy his troops and coordinate proper reconnaissance and artillery when getting strafed by enemy air. Immediately after the battle, Eisenhower began reorganizing the army. Major General Frettenall took the blame for the failure of Kasserine Pass, along with General Anderson. Both were blamed for keeping their forces separate and open to being defeat in detail. Frettenall was also blamed for not deploying or properly equipping his French reserve units. Thus, he was accused of sacrificing his name in the name of the Americans being the sole victor of the war. George Patton was pulled from the planned invasion of Sicily and took command of the 2nd Corps, while Omar Bradley was appointed Assistant Corps Commander to Patton. Together with the help of the British and French, they were able to push the Germans out of Africa entirely.